This lesson's about logic and being able to apply different conditions in order to output different results from the blocks of code. So depending on if the condition is true, we're going to be running different blocks of code that are only going to be run if the conditional statement is going to be true. If it's false, we do have an alternative where we can output a result. If none of the conditions are true, then we using else will output a alternative result if none of them are true. We're also going to be looking at the ternary operator. So this is a shorthand way in order to return back either a true result or a false result, depending on the condition. As well, we are going to be looking at the switch statement and using a different statement and checking to see if the value of that statement matches any of the cases, or if we need to output the default resulting block of code. And this is all going to be output into the console and as well output into the web page. Create a new JS file. I'm calling it app5.js, linking it to the same HTML. I've got the HTML opened in the browser on the right-hand side, the DevTools console opened on the bottom of the right-hand side. Now let's get open up at the JavaScript and we'll look at what we can do with comparison operators. So comparison operators allow us to apply some logic. So we can have a condition to check to see if, and we can see if 5 is greater than 10 and return back the result. We can also just simply include that as a condition within the console and we get a Boolean value that's being returned back of false. So if this statement is false, then it's not going to run the content in here. If it's true, then it will run that content. So if the condition comes out to be true, then it will run whatever content and whatever block of code that we've got here. So I'm going to simply output into the console the value of was true. Let's refresh it and we see that output gets resulted and added into the console. So if this was false, and because this condition is no longer true, we're not going to see that output. We're only going to see the was true. So when we see the true condition being output into the console with the condition and the logical operator. We can also check to see if values are equal to other values. So let's set some variables where we've got a value of 5 and we'll set the value of b. So create a few other variables and b. So this is going to be a string value of 5. And then c will be a value of a plus b. And now let's add in a condition to check to see if a is greater than the value of 5. And if it is, then I'll declare another variable, and that can just be val. And then after the condition is run, we'll output whatever the result of val is into the console. And also, so that we can continue with what we were doing last time, let's output some of the results into the web page as well. So selecting the element using the document and query selector, select the element with a class of output. So it's going to select that first element on the page, and we'll update the value of output, updating the text content of output to whatever we've got as a result of val. So let's do a refresh. And right now we get a value of val as undefined because we haven't actually set a value of val. So let's set that, and we're going to write into it, and using the backticks this time, so the template literals, we're going to set that the value of val was greater than 5. So let's refresh that, and we don't get anything into the console because there's no set value for val, as a is equal to 5, and when we say a is greater than 5, it's actually equal to, so it's not greater than 5. So let's update this to an equal sign and a refresh, and now we do get that output being output into the web page as well as into the console, because this now is true. You can also set that you can do a combination of greater than or equal to or less than or equal to. So as long as it's equal to, or if a is greater than 5, then this statement will be true. And since we're updating the value of A, let's bring that into the string value. In order to bring it into a template literal, we can use the $sign and the curly brackets and then set the JavaScript statement that we want to run. And this is just outputting the value of A into that string. So now we get that 15 was greater than 5, and we know that that is true. Let's try a few other ones where we're going to check to see if the value of B is equal to the value of 5. And I'll update A back to having a value of 5. And we're going to say that B is equal to, and right now it's just a value of 5. We can also, within the statement, have 5 this way, and that way when we want to update the variable, we can do that as well within that statement. So refresh it, and we see 5 is equal to 5. So even though that B is a string and the data type is different, it's still seeing that as equal. And if you do want to include the data type, you would use the 3 equal signs to check to see if it's equal to and the type is also equal. And if you do that, then this statement is going to be no longer true, and we're not going to get that output, and we're still reverting back to the original output from the first statement that we had. You can also do a not equal to, so doing a not equal to sign, so that's with the exclamation mark equal, and once again this statement is not true. But if we do the not equal to with the type, then that's going to return back that it's equal to 5. So let's update this back to the 3 equal signs, and we'll apply some additional conditions. Add in logical operators, so we can see that true, and using the and logical operator. So if we're using and both statements are true, then the result is going to be true. If we're using and one of the statements is false, it's going to return back false. If we want to check to see if either one is going to be true, we can use or. So that's going to be the 2 pipes together. And so this will return back true if either one of them is going to be equivalent to true. So that returns back a true on that. And so that means that both of them would have to be false if we're using or in order to return back a false result for that statement. Let's try that out within the code. I'm going to add in some more values. We'll set a value of D to be 10. And now let's apply the condition where we're going to check to see if the value of A is greater than D. And I'm going to wrap this within the parentheses. And true. So if we had another statement and if that was true, then we can output the result. So let's update val to be equal to, using the backticks, that the value of A is greater than the value of D. And we'll do a refresh. So 5 was greater than 5. And because this is not true, we're not getting any type of result. Within the conditional statements, you can add in an else. So if none of this is true, then we can return back a specific result. And in this case, we can say that not true, that A is greater than D. And we see that not true. So let's update some of the values, and we'll set A to 15. And so 15 is greater than 10, so we just get that output, that result there. And we can have multiple conditions. So this one can also be a condition where we can check to see if A is greater than 0. And that's going to result back to that result. And we can add in both of those conditions in the output. So also for conditional statements, there's a shorter way to write this, and that's using a ternary operator. So we can set the value of val to be equal to the result that's going to be returned back from the ternary operator. So in this case, we're going to have that same condition that we just used, where A is greater than D, and the result is going to be that A is higher. Otherwise, if this is not true, if it returns back false, it'll say A is lower. And that's going to result back and return that back into the value of val, and therefore outputting it into the console. If we update the value of A, we're going to see that A is lower because this statement is no longer true, and that's going to be resulting in a return value for this ternary operator of A is lower, and that's being assigned to val, and then we're taking val, of course, and outputting it into the console, and then also updating the text content with that. The if statement, as we've been using, allows us to specify a block of code that's going to be executed if the condition is true, and we also have an option to execute additional code if using the else to specify a block of code that's going to be run if this condition is false. You can apply additional conditions within it. So let's set up the condition where we're going to check to see if 5 is greater than 10. And we run that block of code. And if it's not, then we're going to run this block of code and simply set the value of val to be false. And here we're going to set the value of val to be true. So refresh it, and we're returning back false. What if we want to have another condition here? And this is where we can use else if to specify a new condition if the first condition comes out as false. So just as in this example, this first condition is not true, so it's coming back as false, and this is where we can specify else if. And else if gives us another opportunity to apply another condition to see if it's going to be true. So we can check to see if 10 is equal to 5. And this as well is going to come back as false and not going to be showing this result. If this result is true, so if 10 is greater than 5, then we're going to get that output being resulted. So if none of these are going to be true, then the else is going to provide the final block of code that's going to be executed. So this block of code gets executed if condition 1 and condition 2 are both false. If condition 1 is true, this block of code gets executed, none of the other code gets executed. If the second condition is true, this block of code is going to get executed, and the else does not get executed. But if both of them are false, then we're going to get the resulting the last block of code being executed. So if this comes back as true, and it's only until both of them are false that we're going to get the last result being executed. There's also what's known as a switch statement. So switch statement is used to perform different actions based on whether the condition is true. So right now we've set a value of A equals 5. So we'll use the value of A within the switch as the expression. And we'll check to see if the value of A is going to be resulting, and if the value of A is going to be equal to 5, the result is going to be running this block of code. And I'll just output a string value of 5 for val. And after every case, we want to make sure that we break so that if this case is true, then it stops running the conditions. We'll add in a few other cases. So if the value of A is going to be 15, then we'll output a value of val for 15. And if none of them are true, then we can have an option to run a block of code as a default, and I'll output that none were true within the switch. So let's refresh. We get an output of 5. Let's update the value of A to 8. And this time we get none were true in the switch statement. So essentially it's using the value of A and checking to see if it is equal to 5, if it's equal to 15, and it's running the block of code. If you remove out the break, what it will do is it will run the code once it finds a true condition. And here it's going to set the value of val to 5. And because there's no break, it will continue on to the next case where it's setting the value of val to 15. And that's why we're getting that output of 15. And let me add the break back in to the switch statement. And right now the value of val, once again, value of a is going to be 8. So none of these are going to be true. And this is where it's going to be using the default of the switch statement. So the break keyword, once it reaches the break keyword, it breaks out of the switch block and returns the result of the block of code. So now we've covered several different ways to apply logic within your application. Go ahead and try it out. Create some if statements with various conditions, checking to see if they're true, having different outputs, whether it's true or false. Also, don't forget to try out the switch statement, and you can be ready to move on to the next lesson.